So you're probably sitting there and you are looking for an emergency line of credit. Unfortunately, you also happen to have bad credit. So how do you actually reconcile those two elements? You are looking for emergency cash to take care of business, to actually renovate your house, to buy something. I mean, whatever it is that you need the emergency line of credit for. How do you actually reconcile those two things, the poor credit and the need to have access to quick cash? So here is the overview. So in today's conversation, I'll be sharing a few hacks with you to kind of help you sort of disentangle the whole thing, okay, to really understand how you need to proceed. But before we actually get into the nitty gritty, it's really important to understand how a line of credit, a personal line of credit works. Because if you have to actually, if you're looking for an emergency line of credit, you need to first understand how a traditional line of credit works. So basically, the bank or the credit union or an online lender or an alternative lender will give you access to, say, 25 grand, right? So you have access to 25 grand, and you don't have to use the 25 grand automatically. You can tap into it. You can say, I'm withdrawing. It's called a draw. So you're withdrawing 5,000 from the 25,000. So you still have a limit of 25,000. So as long as you don't go above it, you're kind of cool. So you can use the cash for anything you want. Like you can take care of a funeral, like something very urgent, a medical emergency, or something in the basement in your house, whatever. So basically, the thing is that interest rates on emergency lines of credit or personal lines of credit, for that matter, are variable because it depends on the economy, it depends on the lender, it depends on a lot of things like the Federal Reserve interest rates and whatnot. Okay. And you only pay interest on the money you use. No collateral is ever required, okay? And fees will vary based on the institution. If you go to a credit union, for example, and you are looking for an emergency line of credit for bad credit at that credit union, your fees will be overall lower than if you went to, let's say you went to a bank, okay? It is what it is. And so if you have low or no credit, which is in your situation, you may not qualify. If you do qualify, you will have a high APR. So just be aware of that. You're going to have a high APR, okay? And you might have a lower amount approved. By the way, welcome back to the show. It's really a pleasure to have you here. And so let me give you the steps you need to follow if you are looking for an emergency line of credit, personal line of credit with bad credit. Okay. So how do you actually get it? So first of all, I want you to check your credit score. I mean, I know you telling me that you have bad credit. Okay. But when was the last time you checked your credit score? Because sometimes there could be a delta. There could be a variance between what you think your credit score is and reality. This is why it's important to check your credit score as often as possible, especially if you have bad credit, because anything can happen. And your score can move either way. Your score can get worse or better. Who knows? Maybe you actually came out of the poor credit zone and you're now in fair credit, which changes everything. So it's important, therefore, that you actually you corroborate your credit score. And you have to be really clear about what we are talking about here. You want an emergency line of credit. Okay. What is the amount that you need? Is it 5,000, 10,000, 20,000, 50 grand? What is it? And based on that, you want to ask yourself, which banks or credit unions do I have an existing relationship with? It's very important to understand that you always want to start when they already know you, right? Don't actually go for an emergency line of credit to an institution that has no idea who you are, especially if you have bad credit. If you don't have an account with them, if you don't have any tie with them, you can't really get the line of credit. As we say in credit analysis, the ties that you have will determine your credit. It is what it is, okay? And when we talk about ties, we're speaking about ties not only personally, but also financially. So you always want to start with the bank or credit unions where you already have an account and you want to apply. Now, when it comes to applying, you want to go to a branch or you want to do things on the phone. Either way, you want to speak to someone before you apply. Don't apply for an emergency line of credit for bad credit online. don't you actually go for that. Okay, it's always better to ask questions to gather a lot of intel before you apply. You will thank me later. Now, I want to quickly recontextualize today's conversation. So what is today's topic? We're talking about emergency line of credit with bad credit. How do you get it? I'm sharing with you a few hacks that will help you actually have a clear idea about the whole topic. Okay. So here is the approach I want you to take. You need to really think about the repayment of your personal line of credit before you apply. Let me repeat that. Before you apply for an emergency line of credit, I want you to think about the repayment of that line of credit. In other words, if you tap into, let's say you draw $5,000 out of a 25,000 credit limit, how are you going to repay it? Have you thought about it already? The reason why I'm saying this is because the lender is going to ask you, the lender is going to probe you on your ability to repay whatever you tap into, whatever you draw from the line of credit. If you can't answer that question satisfactorily, in other words, if you're not giving a sure and assertive answer to that question, they're not going to approve you. Because remember, lenders are constantly trying to mitigate risk, right? They're constantly trying to reduce the risk of default, right? And so you have to think about the repayment of your emergency line of credit. Do you have a job right now? Do you have an opportunity to earn cash in the future? Is anybody going to help you? A friend, a family member, right? Are you going to inherit some kind of money from a relative? Those are important elements because the lender is looking at the draw period versus the repayment period. The lending institution is looking at whether you have chosen to go with balloon payments, and if you are comfortable with the demand line of credit. What I'm trying to say here is that your ability to repay the line of credit you just are about to apply for is going to help you a lot improve your approval odds. It's just funny. Like it works in a very bizarre way, but it is what it is because the lenders are constantly, as I just said, they are constantly trying to reduce the risk of default. They're constantly trying to cover their asses, and it's just normal. If you are a lender, you will really understand. You would do exactly the same thing. Here is a bonus for you. When we talk about emergency lines of credit, you need to understand that this emergency line of credit can actually be one of three things. You can have an emergency unsecured line of credit. You can have an emergency secured line of credit. And you can have an emergency business line of credit. Why is it important for you to understand that? It's important so that you don't waste your time with the wrong emergency line of credit, boss. Because let me give you an example. Let's say you are looking for an unsecured line of credit, but you happen to have a single member LLC. Let's say you're somewhere in Oregon, and in your state, you can actually apply for a business line of credit as an individual, even though you're just a person, you're just a single member LLC. Because there are some states that do not allow you to apply for a business line of credit or a business credit card if you're a single member LLC. Okay. So what I want to say here is that you have to look at the opportunities. You have to look at the options that you have, especially if you are in an emergency. Okay. So when we talk about an unsecured business line of credit, no, not unsecured personal line of credit, you don't pledge any collateral. This is kind of cool if you don't want to pledge anything, or if you don't have anything. But if you do have something, because if you have valuables that you will love to pledge as collateral, this will will speed up the process for your approval when it comes to emergency line of credit, bad credit. Why? Because the lender all of a sudden realizes that they are not losing anything, because push comes to shove, they'll just repo your assets. Okay, so it's important to really have a clear idea about your assets, to look at your balance sheet, to look at your short-term assets, your long-term assets, to see which assets you can actually pledge as collateral. And one thing I also want to say here, and the same applies for a business line of credit. The good thing about emergency business lines of credit is that you can actually get more money, okay, as a business than you can as an individual. Let me quickly remind you of today's topic. And we love to do this because we want to recontextualize the conversation so people who just join us, in translation can really understand what we're talking about. So I'm talking to you today about emergency line of credit with bad credit. How do you actually qualify real quick? So here is the decision I want you to really think about. So whether or not you should go for an emergency line of credit for bad credit, you need to have a clear idea about the pros and cons of an emergency line of credit. Okay. So the pros are that you can withdraw funds on an as needed basis. You have this kind of credit product is very flexible in how you can use your funds, and you have consistent access to funds when you need them, so you don't have to reapply for a loan. This is kind of cool because you are preserving your FICO score, right? Because if you had to apply for a line of credit or a loan for that matter, every time you need cash, your FICO score will be decimated. And another pro that we love, another advantage that we love with a personal line of credit, whether you use it for emergencies or just regular business, like you are required to pay interest on only the funds that you take out. So the amount that you draw out of your overall credit line. What about the cons of a personal line of credit? Now, there are some lenders that will charge you a fee each time you withdraw money. So it's called a draw fee. Okay. And you may be charged application and maintenance fees. You have variable interest rates that can make it challenging to budget because depending on how much you are being charged from one quarter to another or from one month to another. I mean, this is very important because sometimes the economy goes through some gyrations, some yo-yo movement, some yo-yos, and the interest rates just follow the same pattern. So if you are caught in on the wrong side of the interest rates and the Federal Reserve decision making process, this could be painful, really, and so consistently withdrawing large amounts may impact your credit score. Why? Because this will affect your CUR, your credit utilization ratio. If your CUR goes up, there is an inverse relationship. There's an inverse correlation between your CUR and your credit score. So if your CUR, your credit utilization ratio goes up, your credit score will go down and vice versa. So here is a winner for you. The thing here is that when we talk about emergency line of credit for bad credit, lenders for the last 50 years or 75 years for that matter have been known to approve the use of loan proceeds for a constellation of things. In other words, there are rarely restrictions on the use of funds. So once the lender approves your emergency line of credit for bad credit, you can use the cash for almost anything. I mean, anything that is legal though. Okay. And so it goes from everything from home renovation or repair, right? Let's say you got to take care of some kind of leaking in the basement in your house. So if you have the funds for an emergency line of credit, you can actually hire a plumber or somebody to actually come take care of the problem here. Okay. You can also use the cash for emergency funding. So this could be anything. Could be anything like kids have to eat, or do you have to put food? You have to put food on the table. You have to take care of your grandmother, your grandfather. I mean, whatever it is. I mean, anything that is emergency. It can be. You can use the cash for ongoing medical costs. So lenders have no problem with that. Okay. You can use the cash for moving and relocation expenses. Let's say you have to suddenly move out of town, or you have to move with your family, go to another town, and you did not actually, it was a last minute thing, and you don't have the cash. So you're kind of short on cash. So you need an emergency line of credit, but you just happen to also have bad credit. Okay. And you can use the cash for wedding deposits. I mean, sometimes you can't. I mean, we advise our viewers against that, but hey, listen. It is what it is. If you have to do it, well, you have to do it. In other words, we do not advise folks to actually literally marry finance and private life. Like if you have to borrow to make a deposit for your wedding, then you know something is wrong with that picture already. Okay, you have to actually sacrifice to accumulate the money that you need for that. But that's another topic for another day. You can use an emergency line of credit for a business startup cost also, or for funeral expenses. Okay, so those are the uses of loan proceeds that lenders are comfortable with. They're not going to restrict you if you start using the cash for those things. So here is a pick for you. Here is the pick I want you to think about. So before you pick an emergency line of credit for bad credit, you need to understand how a personal line of credit works. I think I sort of explained that already. But one thing I also want to say here is that you need to pay attention to interest rates. I said this before, but those actually go, there is a strong correlation between the state of the economy, the overall state of the economy, and so the overall movement of interest rates in the overall economy, and the interest rate that your lender will charge on your emergency line of credit, which is why I always say if you get an emergency line of credit, you want to pay it off as soon as possible, because you got it for an emergency. So once the emergency is actually over, it's just time to actually close the emergency line of credit. Because I mean, if your life was just made up of emergencies all the time, then we have a bigger problem. But that's beside the point. So what I'm trying to say here is what I'm trying to say, that you have to pay attention to the fees, the interest rates, the fees, because anytime you have an emergency line of credit open, or just a regular line of credit open, you do have to deal with a catalog of fees, from origination fees to application fees to maintenance fees. You also have, in some cases, late payment fees. That's if you actually are late, or cash advance fees. So it's really important, again, to look to, because see, the thing is that all those fees will add up. You could probably just sit there and say, well, those are small fees anyway. Who cares? Blah 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 blah. You never know, boss. You never know. I mean, you could look at them and think they are small fees, but again, they accumulate over time. Because remember, an emergency line of credit, unless you close it, it's open. It's open for a long time. Okay, and unless the bank comes and say, you know what, we don't like your ass anymore, we're just going to close the line of credit. But they'll keep it open because for them, it's generating revenue. Okay, so it's up to you to really look at your budget, to analyze your financial situation and say, okay, do I need this emergency line of credit anymore? Because I fixed the emergency, quote unquote, right? I took care of it. So now it's about time I close this line of credit, because sometimes having too much credit also can actually be a detriment. Because let's say if you are trying to get a credit card, for example, the credit card company can say, you know what, this person already has so much credit. Why do we need to give him or her, another line? Or they might give you a line, but a very small limit. So there are pros and cons of keeping open an emergency line of credit for bad credit, or good credit for that matter. It doesn't really, so those are things I want you to really think about. Thank you so much for your attention. I really appreciate it. In today's conversation, I was just talking to you about emergency line of credit for bad credit. So I gave you a few tips, tricks, and hacks so that you have a clearer idea about how to actually apply, how to qualify for this emergency line of credit, how to apply successfully, and how to use the funds once you are approved. Thank you. God bless you. I'll speak to you another time. But until then, remember, stay marvelous.